2 hours ago, the White House issued an executive order that crosses every line in modern alliance diplomacy. Not tariffs, not trade restrictions, a direct military ultimatum against America's longest undefended border. The Department of Defense announced immediate deployment of 15,000 active duty troops to the Canadian border under Operation Northern Shield. Armored vehicles, surveillance drones, permanent military checkpoints at every major crossing point. The stated justification is border security. The real reason is Carney refused to abandon Canada's independent Arctic sovereignty claims that conflict with American resource interests in the region. The deployment order contains 3 escalatory components that fundamentally militarize a relationship that has never required such measures. First, all civilian crossings now require biometric screening and 48-hour advance approval from Homeland Security. The current system processes 400,000 people daily with minimal delays. The new requirements reduce capacity to fewer than 50,000 per day. The border effectively closes to normal traffic. Second, all Canadian aircraft entering American airspace must now file military-style flight plans 72 hours in advance and submit to armed escort by U.S. Air Force fighters. Commercial airlines estimate this makes 90% of current routes operationally impossible. Air Canada, WestJet, and dozens of regional carriers face immediate shutdown of American service. Third, the deployment includes authorization for what the Pentagon calls defensive reconnaissance operations. That means American military drones now fly surveillance missions over Canadian territory without Canadian permission. Sovereignty violations normalized through executive order. Washington expected shock. They expected Carney to immediately request emergency talks. They expected Canadian business sectors to panic and pressure Ottawa into rapid concessions. They calculated wrong on every single assumption. But before we break down what actually happened, if you want coverage that goes beyond the headlines, hit subscribe and like this video so you never miss stories like this. Now here is what Carney actually did. 60 minutes after the deployment order became public, Carney appeared on national television from the Department of National Defense headquarters in Ottawa. Standing behind him was the Chief of Defense Staff, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and via satellite link from Brussels, the NATO Secretary General. The visual communicated everything before a single word was spoken. Carney opened with 8 words that made every military analyst in Washington lean forward. Canada has prepared for this moment for months. Then he announced 4 countermeasures that sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and American industry. First, Canada is immediately activating reciprocal military posture along the border. 12,000 Canadian Armed Forces personnel are deploying to border positions within 48 hours, not as an invasion force, as a mirror. Every American checkpoint will face a Canadian checkpoint. Every American drone will be tracked by Canadian air defense radar. Every armed patrol will be matched. Carney stated clearly, if the United States militarizes our shared border, Canada will ensure that militarization is symmetrical. We will not be intimidated on our own soil. Second, Canada is closing American military access to the Northwest Passage and all Arctic transit routes through Canadian territorial waters. The U.S. Navy has used these routes for decades under informal agreement. Now every transit requires individual approval from the Prime Minister's office with 90-day advance notice. Current American submarine operations in the Arctic become legally impossible overnight. Third, all military equipment contracts with American defense contractors are under immediate 60-day review. Canada purchases roughly $8 billion annually in American defense systems, aircraft parts, and military technology. Carney announced that for every contract, Canadian officials will now seek alternative suppliers from European and allied sources. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, billions in annual revenue suddenly at risk. And this was the move that made the Pentagon go silent. Fourth, Canada is invoking Article 4 of the NATO Treaty, requesting immediate consultations with all alliance members regarding American military actions against a fellow NATO member. Carney stated, when one NATO ally militarizes its border against another NATO ally without provocation or consultation, the entire alliance must ask what mutual defense means. The NATO Secretary General confirmed on the same broadcast that consultations would begin within 24 hours. This was not a symbolic gesture. This was Canada forcing every NATO member to publicly choose whether American unilateral military action against an ally is acceptable alliance behavior. Carney closed with words directed at American citizens living in border states. Your government has deployed troops to a border that has never needed them. They have disrupted the lives of millions of people who cross peacefully every day for work, for family, for commerce. We are not your threat. Ask your leaders who this deployment actually protects. No questions. He walked away. But what really shook Washington was what came next. The international response was immediate and devastating to American credibility. Within 3 hours, 22 NATO members issued statements expressing concern about unilateral military escalation between alliance partners. France and Germany went further, calling the deployment inconsistent with alliance principles. The United Kingdom issued a carefully worded statement that clearly sided with Canadian territorial sovereignty. Even more significantly, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, key Pacific allies, all released statements emphasizing the importance of respecting Allied sovereignty. The message was unmistakable. If America militarizes borders against Canada today, what prevents the same against us tomorrow? Washington expected to isolate Canada. Instead, Washington isolated itself. The American business reaction was immediate panic. The Chamber of Commerce called the deployment economically catastrophic. The National Association of Manufacturers warned that border militarization would disrupt supply chains affecting 3.2 million American jobs. Automotive executives were blunt. One CEO told CNBC, "You cannot build cars in North America with a militarized border. Parts cross that border multiple times during production. This does not hurt Canada. This shuts down Detroit, Ohio, and Michigan." Energy sector executives warned that Canadian electricity powers 6 American states. Natural gas from Canada heats 15 million American homes. Disrupting border crossings disrupts energy infrastructure that American cities depend on daily. Agricultural industry leaders noted that 60% of American fresh produce imports cross the Canadian border during winter months. Militarizing that border means food shortages in American supermarkets within weeks. These are not Canadian voices. These are American business leaders telling their own government that military posturing against Canada damages America more than Canada. Here is what makes this moment so significant. Carney did not scramble to respond. He executed a plan. The troop deployments were coordinated in advance. NATO consultation was pre-planned with alliance partners. The defense contract reviews were already drafted. Canada was not caught off guard. Canada was ready. A senior Pentagon official told reporters anonymously, "We expected to leverage military presence for diplomatic gains. We did not expect Canada to have a fully coordinated response involving half of NATO within the first hour." The detail that terrifies Washington is this. Carney's countermeasures are sustainable. Canadian forces can maintain border posture indefinitely. Arctic route closures cost Canada nothing but cost the U.S. Navy critical operational flexibility. Defense contract diversification strengthens Canadian defense independence long-term. The NATO consultation forces alliance solidarity questions that Washington cannot afford. Every American move hurts American interests. Every Canadian countermove strengthens Canadian position. Trump now faces 3 impossible options. Escalate military presence and watch NATO fracture over alliance member conflict. Withdraw troops and admit the deployment was a failed bluff. Maintain current posture and watch American supply chains collapse while Canada builds permanent alternative defense relationships. None of these options deliver what Trump wanted. He wanted submission. He got symmetrical military response backed by NATO consultation. He wanted Canada isolated and pressured. He got international support and alliance solidarity. He wanted to prove American military presence forces compliance. He proved that militarizing Allied borders destroys American credibility faster than any external threat could. There is quiet discussion in Washington about finding diplomatic off-ramps. But Carney has stated publicly that Canada will not negotiate while American troops are deployed in what he called an aggressive posture. Any talks require troop withdrawal first. That means Trump backs down before dialogue even begins. The economic pressure on Washington is intensifying by the hour. Michigan and New York governors are demanding federal intervention to prevent border chaos. Border state senators are calling the deployment reckless. American defense contractors are privately lobbying the White House to reverse course before losing billions in Canadian contracts. Meanwhile, Canada is moving forward with alternative arrangements. European defense ministers are already scheduling visits to Ottawa. Arctic allies are coordinating on transit protocols that exclude American participation. NATO members are actively discussing what alliance obligations mean when one member militarizes against another. 2 hours ago, the White House thought deploying troops would force Canadian capitulation. 2 hours later, Canada has mobilized symmetric military response, invoked NATO treaty consultations with alliance-wide support, placed billions in American defense contracts under review, and closed Arctic access that the U.S. military depends on for strategic operations. Trump wanted to demonstrate power. He demonstrated why power without strategy becomes self-defeating. He wanted Carney to panic. Carney was 3 moves ahead with alliance backing. He wanted to prove America can militarily pressure its neighbor into compliance. He proved that the neighbor has been preparing for this exact scenario and has the international support to turn the pressure back completely. Mark Carney is not reacting anymore. He is executing a strategic framework built over months with allied coordination that Washington never anticipated. And the White House is learning that military posture without economic logic or alliance support does not create leverage. It creates isolation. 2 hours ago, Washington deployed troops. 2 hours later, Washington is scrambling to explain to allies, business leaders, and border state governors why militarizing the world's longest peaceful border serves American interests. The answer is becoming clear. It does not.